It is a complex relationship between the two countries. On one hand, politicians trying to score points blame China for taking our jobs, unfair trade practices, keeping their currency values too low against the dollar. But on the other hand, China has saved this country economically time and time again and is one of our best trading partners. This visit by the vice president is more than symbolic. This is the reality of our time, that the U.S. and China will be close friends, or at least business partners, for generations to come. Now, to talk more about this, Joe Weisenthal, the deputy editor for the Business Insider, joins me from our New York studio. Hey there, Joe. What's going on here?
How you doing?
Good. Why do you think American companies are not able to invest in their own infrastructure? Why do they need China's help?
Well, I think there's kind of a complex issue. There are a lot of different sort of things to untangle here. I mean, first of all, I guess there's this idea that there are Chinese companies that for various reasons can manufacture pieces of infrastructure faster than American companies. That's not really that surprising in the sense, I mean, China is out manufacturing the US in a lot of areas. So for a city or a state that's looking for the cheapest source of building something, I guess it's not surprising that there are often situations where China's more competitive. Where it's weirder and kind of hard to figure out is this idea that we need China to help invest in domestic infrastructure. People like to say that the US is broke, but it's really not the case. And there would really be nothing except for politics stopping DC from investing a lot more in infrastructure in California and other parts of the country. So the idea of going with our cap in hand to ask China to invest in infrastructure in California is really bizarre, and I think really is an indication mainly of DC dysfunction rather than some economic necessity.
And we should mention, considering some of these projects in California, a lot of, the workers will in fact be American workers. But when you think about what goes into some of these projects, the people at the top, the planners, a lot of them, the bigger people on these projects will be from China. So it's pretty interesting. Let's talk about something else that's going on too, not just in California. It's something interesting, at least that I found. It appears China, which is the largest outside lender to the U.S., has reduced holdings of U.S. treasuries by about $30 billion. They say they instead want to devote more money to assist Europe in addressing the debt crisis. I don't really ever quote Michelle Bachmann, but, she posed the question, is China our sugar daddy? And maybe the question is China now everyone's sugar daddy?
Well, it's complex. I mean, first of all, I would actually urge people not to read much into China reducing its holdings of U.S. treasuries by $30 billion. That's basically nothing.
It's about 2%,
in the grand scheme of things.
2.5%.
Yeah, right. And also if you look at over the past years, it kind of undulates in a year. So, for example, last spring, it went down for a while, then it picked back up. So thinking about it in terms of, they're giving up on the U.S., so they're not going to lend to the U.S. anymore, and they're going to lend to Europe, it's probably not the big problem. And I actually think it's actually kind of scandalous, the idea of Europe begging China for help. Again, for kind of the same reason. Europe has its own currency, it could print money, it has plenty of wealth in Germany and so on. China, for all the hype it gets about how big it is, remains a pretty poor country on a per capita basis. The average Chinese citizen is way poorer than the average European citizen. So I actually think it's kind of an outrage that China is being asked to bear the burden for Europe when Europe's problems are mostly political and structural and not really about a lack of money per se. So I don't think China should be thought of so much as a sugar daddy and that they're so rich and everyone has to beg for them. I think the fact that countries are begging for them for help is really, both in the U.S. and in Europe, a sign of their own dysfunction, inability to get their own act together, not really about a lack of money.
I think that's an interesting point, and certainly one of the reasons for the credit downgrade earlier in the year. It just seemed that business in Washington was so dysfunctional it couldn't be done. What do you see moving forward, Joe, with this relationship with China? Certainly, the vice president, who's in L.A. right now, was in Iowa yesterday and in Washington a few days ago. Definitely slated to be the next president of China, seen as a little different from the current president, Hu Jintao. So talk a little bit about, does anything change, or does this relationship sort of stay status quo?
Well, it probably will stay status quo in the sense that I don't think there's going to be some radical change in the relationship overnight, but the thing is, things are changing already. And the trend is clearly up in terms of the U.S. selling more to the Chinese all the time. The Chinese currency, for all the talk people have about how weak it is, continues to strengthen. Basically on a daily basis, the Chinese currency goes up a little bit. So I don't think we're going to see some radical change, overnight where suddenly, they massively hike their currency or whatnot. But change is happening, and the Chinese consumer is growing wealthier, and that will be good for a lot of American companies. And there are a lot of American companies that right now are making a fortune selling in China, whether it's Yum Brands and the success of KFC or Caterpillar selling all these earth-moving equipment to China. So
let me talk real quick.
It is more two-way than people give it credit for.
Let me talk real quick about some of the rhetoric that's out there, certainly coming from a lot of places, including the White House. Let's hear from President Obama real quickly and then talk about it.
American workers, you guys, folks like Kathleen, you're the most productive on earth. You can compete with anybody. You will outwork anybody as long as the playing field is level. You can compete with any worker, anywhere, anytime. In China, in Europe, it does not matter. If we have a level playing field, America will always win because we've got the best workers.
Really optimistic there by the president. America will always win because we have the best workers. But why then do we see so many situations in which, for example, that iPhone story that came out a few weeks ago, that why America lost the iPhone work, because the workers are better and more efficient in China. Talk a little bit about, is this rhetoric versus reality, or is it just two different situations?
Yeah, I think Obama is probably spinning a bit of a tale there. The fact of the matter is, for a lot of manufacturing, it clearly doesn't make sense to do it in the United States. All that being said, manufacturing in the U.S., and people never talk about this, it continues to grow. The manufacturing employment as a percentage of total employment has gone down quite a bit over the last several decades. But as an industry, American manufacturing continues to be impressive and expand. Actually, lately, it's expanded much faster than the economy as a whole. So it's complicated. It's not a matter of our workers not being good, our manufacturing sector not being competitive. But yeah, there are clearly areas where, just for matters of price and environmental regulations and safety, it's a lot cheaper to produce in China.
All right, Joe Weisenthal, deputy editor for the Business Insider in our New York studios.